How's it everyone? Grant here, and in this video I'm bringing you my review of the Huawei Mate 9 after using it for just over 3 weeks. So let's go through some of the basic specs here. It's got a large 5.9-inch 1080p IPS LCD display. It's running Huawei's HiSilicon Kirin 960 octa-core processor. If you're not familiar with the Kirin processors, it's basically fast. This 960 is blazingly fast, and it's even clocked higher than the Snapdragon 821, if that means something for you. It's also got a 4 gigs of RAM. It's packing 64 gigs of onboard storage with micro SD expansion up to 256 gigs. It has dual rear cameras, so it has one 20 megapixel monochrome sensor and a 12 megapixel color sensor. It operates at an aperture of f/2.2 with optical image stabilization, OIS. It's got 2x optical zoom, similar to the iPhone 7 Plus. It's got phase detection and laser autofocus with dual LED flash, and it's capable of recording up to 4K video. The front camera is an 8 megapixel shooter with an f/1.9 aperture, and it's capable of recording up to 1080p video. And this package is packing a whopping 4,000 milliamp hour battery, so that should mean great battery life, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the review. So first thing I want to get into was software. So the Mate 9 is running EMUI 5.0 on top of Android 7.0 Nougat. So while EMUI 5 is a big improvement over version 4, one of the big issues that I had with EMUI 4 was how it handled notifications, and specifically lock screen notifications. Now, while this was mostly fixed in EMUI 5, it still has some odd quirks here. So now on the lock screen, you'll see I've got a couple of different notifications. In EMUI 4, you couldn't swipe these away, so at least in version 5 here, you can actually go and swipe notifications away from your lock screen. And another quirk in EMUI 4 was that you couldn't actually view the contents of your notifications, so you couldn't swipe down to view more of the contents. So now you can view the contents of the notification, although you can't just swipe down. You can tap on it and it'll actually it'll say tap to open again, and then you can view the rest of your notification contents. So that's a little bit oddity, but at least you can see it on your lock screen. Also, if you don't swipe away the lock screen notification and you go ahead and unlock the phone, you can see the notification is still here in the drop down shade. If I go and lock it again and I unlock it, the notification is gone. So I won't see it on the lock screen. If I try to do a pull down here, it's also gone there. So I won't see it from the lock screen notification. I won't see the notification from the lock screen, even though it is still in fact there on the device. I didn't swipe it away. So that's another little bit of oddity of how EMUI handles notifications. It's a little bit more iOS-like. That's kind of how iOS still behaves. So it's a little bit improved in version 5, but still has some quirks to it. Other quirks of the software is that some elements still look a bit cartoonish and even Apple iOS-like. So for example, like the folders. If you'll notice, the same kind of folder organization, if I tap on it, it has the same kind of animation, it magnifies the folder. So this is very iOS-like behavior here. But some areas are greatly improved in this iteration of Emotion UI over its previous 4.0 effort. So quick toggles and notification shades, so that's much more Android-like. You'll notice here you'll have your quick toggles at the top, and you swipe down again, you'll get your full set of quick settings as well as your notification shade. Whereas in EMUI 4, it was kind of that dual shade type of display where if you swipe down on one side, it will show you your notifications. Swipe down from the other, it will show you your quick settings. So it was a two-panel shade. In EMUI 5, it's all back into one panel, just like normal Android will. Other things like your recent apps. So if I go into the recent apps, it's in a card stack display here. I can scroll through them up and down. In EMUI 4 is much more of a horizontal scrolling, much more iOS-like. Some people kind of like that, but this is kind of the stock Android behavior, and I personally prefer that. And if you're interested in more details of the differences between EMUI 4 and this new version 5, I did a video on that, so I'll leave a card in the upper right. You can check that out if you're interested. So other features of the software, like we said, if you go into the settings, we are running Android 7.0 with EMUI version 5. And EMUI, and specifically EMUI 5, has some nice value-added features here, so we can go through some of the settings and show you some of that. One key thing to note is when you're first setting up your phone and you're not getting notifications, this is just a feature of EMUI. You have to go into your notification and status bar setting here and go into notification management. So notifications are managed very granularly at the application level. So much like iOS, you can turn on and off notifications at the app level and even set the type of notification you want. So for example, if I go into a specific app here, I can say allow notifications. So if you're not getting any notifications, make sure that is turned on for that application. You can choose to then display the notification in the status bar up here like you normally see in Android. If you don't want to, you can turn that off. If you want to see a banner, which is a basic pop-up at the top of your screen when a notification comes in, you can set that as well. You can choose the option to display on lock screen. And the last thing is, if after all that and you're still not seeing it on your lock screen, so if you've turned on notifications, you've got it in your status bar, even if you've even got banners on, you've got show on lock screen, and even after all that, if you're not seeing notifications on your, specifically on your lock screen, I would suggest turning on priority display. I noticed that sometimes it won't show on the lock screen. If I have all these things set, including priority display, I'm guaranteed to see the notification everywhere, including on my lock screen. So just one thing to note about EMUI, that's kind of how it behaves. That's just a quick tip. If you're not seeing those notifications coming in, go into notification settings and make sure that it's all turned on for your applications. Other things here that are actually useful are on navigation key. So if you look at your navigation key, this navigation bar at the bottom. So by default, it is here with your standard Android setup with your back, home, and recent apps buttons. If you're coming from Samsung devices where it's reversed, you can also reverse those buttons to have your recent apps on the left and your back button on the right. The other option here is to include a pull down of your notification shade button. So because this is a large 5.9-inch display, if you can't reach that notification shade and you don't, and we'll get to the fingerprint sensor feature there, but if you can't reach the top of your fingers, if you enable that button layout, you get this button here where if you click it, it drops down your notification shade. But the thing it won't do is if you click it, you can't click again to pull it all the way down. So the first time it'll pull down and show your initial set of quick toggles, but you're gonna have to swipe down to see them all again. But it is a quick way to at least get to the basic settings and to see your notifications without having to reach all the way up. The other things are on fingerprint ID. So fingerprint gestures and EMUI is very helpful, like you just saw. You can set it to show your notification panel. So if I swipe down on the fingerprint scanner, it'll pull down the notification shade. But only do it once. In previous iterations of EMUI, if I pull down again on the sensor, it would show the whole quick settings panel. But in this version of EMUI, you only have one swipe down, and it's only going to swipe down to show you your notifications and your initial set of quick settings. There is no secondary swipe down to show you everything. Other things that you can do with the fingerprint sensor is hold it down to take a photo or video. If you want it to answer a call or stop your alarms, you can enable those as well. You can swipe through your photos with your fingerprint sensor if you want. All that's customizable here. I find that notification swipe down the most useful though. Other things are, if we look in Smart Assist, so the floating dock, there's actually a quick setting here for floating dock. So if I enable that, what you'll now see is this floating dock here, and you can reposition this pretty much anywhere you want on your screen. And if you click that, it basically gives you just a set of navigation controls. So if you want to navigate that way, you can just pop that open, you can go back, home, recent apps, lock your screen, or clear all your apps just from this quick settings toggle here. If you don't like that, if you feel like it gets in the way, you can always just go into settings to disable it or go into your quick settings and simply toggle it off. Other things we have here are motion control. So some standard things that other phones have. So basic things like flip to mute. You can pick it up and raise it to your ear to answer your call. You can do smart screenshots. So knuckle gestures are unique to EMUI, which I thought was kind of gimmicky at first, but it's actually kind of useful. The two that I really find most useful are screenshots, and you knock twice, it'll take your screenshot. EMUI also has a quick shortcut here for screenshots, so if you want to just a quick setting toggle, you can do it that way, but you have a knock gesture, that's nice. Where it's most useful to me anyway is if I'm in an app, it can activate your split screen feature. So just drag your knuckle across the screen, it'll activate that split screen, and you can just pick another app, and there you go. And the cool thing is, if you knock anywhere on the screen, sorry, it's hard behind the camera, it'll actually create that split screen at that part of the screen. So couple of knock screen settings that I actually find kind of useful there. Like I said, at first I thought it was pretty gimmicky, but after you start using the phone, those couple features actually come in handy after a while. One-handed UI, so if you want to enable one-handed UI, you can do that. And what that basically does is if you swipe in from the notification from either the left or the right, it'll shrink the size of the screen. To get out of it, just touch outside of it. So swipe in that way will bring you back to the other side. So one-hand navigation, so if it's too big for you and you want to shrink the screen a bit, you can enable that and just quickly enable by swiping on the navigation bar. So that's actually a quite useful feature and a quite nice way to actually activate it. You have standard voice controls, so if you want to do voice controls just like you can within Google and Android, you can activate those things here. You also have touch sensitivity, so glove mode, so if you're in a cold climate, you're wearing gloves and you want better touch sensitivity with it, you can always enable that mode there. Other settings like App Twin. So App Twin is supposed to create a separate instance of the applications that it supports. So if you have two accounts on the same application, you can actually have two different Facebook apps as an example, one each logged into different accounts, so you don't have to log in and log out of the same app. Looks like only WhatsApp and Facebook really support this right now, at least for my installed apps. So it's not too useful for me. If it supported a little bit more apps, it'd be nice, but that is there. And some other nice features that EMUI has is actually located in the settings menu. So if we pull it all the way down there, you see a lot of quick toggles here. We already went through the floating dock and the screenshot quick shot shortcuts, but it also has shortcuts for things like screen recording. So it has built-in screen capture, which is nice. So if you just tap that, it'll start recording your screen. You can do a screen capture to show someone how to do something. I use this a lot with friends and family, so it is a useful built-in feature there. You have other things like eye comfort. So this is just your blue light filter. It's supposed to prevent eye fatigue, especially when you try to read this in dark environments like at night. So we've got a ton of different shortcuts here built in as a part of EMUI, and of course all this is editable. If I want to go and edit that and remove or add anything, I can do that. So that's just a quick run through of all the software settings and some of the useful features within EMUI. So now let's talk performance. Like we said at the top, it's running Huawei's Kirin 960 octa-core processor, and this thing is blazing fast. So you can see I don't have any apps in the background here. We can open up a few apps. Social media apps that are just basic here, so Twitter opens up really quickly there. ESPN, not bad. This tends to take a while to launch. We've got other things like YouTube you can go through really quick there. Google Plus. So you can see app launching is really quick. Recent apps and swiping through them, really nice and quick. Multitasking, task switching, very quick. Scrolling through some of these apps, especially things like Google Plus, that tends to be very choppy with its cards. If you notice, it's not just quick to load, but it's also very smooth to go through. So scrolling is nice and smooth. Even things like Twitter, where it has a lot of content in line, tends to be choppy in some devices, relatively smooth here on the Mate 9. So again, going through the apps, scrolling, multitasking, opening an app, launching split screen. If we find one that actually supports split screen, all these things, just moving through it. Pretty fast and fluid. Resize windows, all the basic things. Nice, fast and fluid. Really no complaints around performance here. Really no complaints around performance here. You can go and launch websites. B&H loads up the content. We can go and click through some things. So pretty quick. So basic web browsing, going through some of your basic apps, all fast and fluid. Performance is really top notch here on the Mate 9. So let's move into display. And so yes, it's lacking a 1440p 2K display. It is an LCD and not AMOLED. And so while I do prefer AMOLED displays, especially Samsung Super AMOLED displays, I'm going to say that this is still a very nice 1080p LCD display. It's possibly one of the best, if not the best LCD display to me on the market. For an LCD display, it's got very vivid and punchy colors. So if you take a look, especially in AMOLED, you're going to see the reds are very red, blues are pretty deep blues. And in LCD displays, their characteristics are traditionally more cooler, a little bit more natural and true to life. This display actually has more punchy colors by default, looks a lot more vivid and more AMOLED-like than LCD. Now this can be adjusted, so for those who actually do like the more natural, cooler tones in LCD displays, you can actually go into your settings, display, and color temperature, and you can adjust that. So if you want it cooler, it'll show up a little bit cooler there. If you want it back to warm and more yellowish tint, there it is. I tend to leave it on default, but you can play around with this to kind of find the right tint that you like, from cooler temperatures here to warmer temperatures here. You can play around that to kind of suit your needs, but for me, I just leave it on default. I like the vividness and the punchy colors. So for an LCD display, this looks really good to my eyes. The other thing in a good display is that how bright can it get? So if I punch this all the way up, it gets really bright. And so you can see there the camera really even has a hard time handling that brightness level. But what this does is in sunlight and outdoors, outdoor visibility with this thing, because it gets so bright, is very good. Even in direct sunlight, you're not going to have any problem seeing the screen. So the one thing to note here is that although this LCD display does tend to have some AMOLED characteristics, from the bright, vivid, punchy colors to the brightness levels, it is still an LCD display, and it will have some inherent limitations. So for example, if I go here and crank up the brightness, and then I go ahead and bring in something that has an AMOLED display, like my Mate 9 Pro here, I'll crank the brightness all the way up on this. Now you notice they both have the same wallpaper, but at full brightness, this really comes out. At least, I'm not sure if camera's picking it up, but in person I can really see the AMOLED display keeps this background wallpaper really dark. The blacks stay black, whereas on the LCD panel it gets a little bit washed out. And especially if I start tilting at different viewing angles, you can start to see how deep the black is on this wallpaper versus how little washed out you can start seeing the LCD screen to get. So even directly I see it a little bit more washed out, but at certain viewing angles, you can start to really see how the AMOLED stays black and how the LCD gets a little bit washed out. So this doesn't really bother me because I'm not really looking at the screen at these kind of viewing angles. It does look a little washed out up front, but I'm normally not cranking the brightness all the way up, especially indoors. But it is something to note because this does bother some people. It doesn't really bother me too much, but this is where you can start to see the difference between AMOLED and LCD. And so no matter how good of an LCD panel you do make, it will have some limitations just due to the technology itself. Now again, like I said, it doesn't really bother me. I do think this LCD display looks very good, has great colors, and gets very bright. But I do know where some of those things do bother some people, so I just want to note that so that you know what you're kind of walking into here. And the last thing that I want to note is that this does not have double tap to wake, so it does have that rear mounted fingerprint scanner. And for any device that has a rear mounted fingerprint scanner, I really want double tap to wake because if I'm laying it flat on a table, double tap to wake comes in really handy. I don't have to contort my hand to reach for the power button. So I'd rather just double tap the screen to light it up to actually check my notifications if I see I have any versus having to contort my hand to try to turn on the power button. So just something minor, but it's something that I really like on devices with those rear mounted fingerprint scanners. So no double tap to wake or sleep supported here on the Mate 9. So now let's take a look at the Mate 9's design. So a lot of people might think this is a boring design because it's just a big slab, rectangular, with a metal back, and that may get boring and repetitive for some people, but I really like it. So this is a big 5.9-inch device, and if we take a look, maybe I'll change the wallpaper here so you can kind of see, but the screen to body ratio on this thing is really great. So if I go to a different colored wallpaper, it might show that off a bit. But as you can already see, really reduced bezels here on the two sides is very thin, and on the top and bottom chins are very minimal. So it's mostly screen. And so being a 5.9-inch device, it doesn't really feel that big. If you want to see comparisons to other devices, I've done that in my unboxing video. I'll leave a card up for you to go check that out. But just to put in comparison and relative terms here, this is about the same size as an iPhone 7 Plus, and I would show you that here, but I'm using it to record this video. I've got that comparison in my unboxing video, so you can check that out. But it's the same size pretty much as an iPhone 7 Plus. This has a 5.9-inch display. The iPhone 7 Plus has a 5.5-inch display, and the iPhone 7 Plus is even a little bit taller. So if you want to see it compared to other phones like the V20, Z Max Pro, Sony X8 Ultra, Nexus 6P, even the Mate 8, all 6-inch devices, go check out the unboxing video. You can see how well this 5.9-inch, almost 6-inch device compares to those. In a lot of cases, it's actually more compact. So the design, even though it may seem boring, it's actually really nice and sleek, very compact for its size. I happen to like unibody metal designs like I've said in the past, so I find this to look really, really nice, especially the black. It's got that all black front screen, so when you're watching media, it just all blends in really nicely. If you look at the size, it's a very thin device for how big it is. So because it is big, you can spread the components across very nicely to keep a very sleek and thin design. Things like attention to detail. So if you can look at it, if I can capture it, it's got those chamfered edges that really reflect nicely into the light there. So really nice chamfered edges. The buttons are very solid, not shaky at all. Very tactile, very clicky. I like that. You need buttons to stand out so you can really feel for ease of use and pressing. And then you see here on the back, it's got that nice dual camera setup. They've actually managed to get a dual camera setup that's fairly minimal. It does not look really ridiculous and ugly. LG, I'm looking at you. It's got that fingerprint scanner like I said here, and I really wish it had that double tap to wake like we were just talking about. So on the rear, it's got the antennas built into this top and bottom housing, like you can see there. And there's other devices that share this design, even Huawei's own devices. And they make these kind of plasticky, and so they really stand out and look pretty ugly. But here they don't feel too plasticky at all, and it really blends into the overall design. It doesn't have antenna bands that really sharply stand out, so this blends in a lot nicer. So just a lot of the subtleties here make this device look really, really nice. And so if you're just looking at it on video or looking at the pictures, I can see how you might think it's boring. It's just a black front screen with a metal body design. But if you're really holding it, you can really appreciate how this feels and the quality of it and how it all just blends in and looks in person. So feel in hand feels really nice. It's got a slight curve back like you can see, and even though it's wide, it's still compact because of that great screen to body ratio. Feels nice in hand, has a good heft to it, solid build quality. That combined with just looking at it in person and seeing those chamfered edges is really impressive in person. I really like the design. To me, it looks really nice, and I appreciate how compact it is for such a big device. The one thing that I'll note is that it is not water resistant. So if for the people that like water resistance, like that peace of mind of having something that might accidentally drop in water and knowing that you'll be okay, it does not have any kind of IP water resistance or waterproofing rating. So you're not getting that on this device. But because of that, if you do like audio, I believe that helps the audio performance, because a lot of devices with that waterproofing have to seal in a lot of these gaps, and it tends to take a hit in speaker quality. And so we'll get into audio a bit later, but you'll see what I'm talking about there. But just something to note, if you like that water resistance, you're not going to find it here on the Mate 9. Moving on to battery life. So what is good battery life to me? I don't measure it in milliamp hours or anything like that. Good battery life to me, it means it needs to have a battery that lasts me all day. So it has to have all day battery life, meaning it needs to last me from when I get up to when I go to bed, worry-free, without me having to think in the back of my head, am I going to have to charge this at any point in time, or do I have to limit my usage to make sure that I don't have to put this thing on a charger? And so all day battery life for me is typically anywhere from 6 or 7 a.m. depending on the day, all the way to at least midnight, if not later. And if it can last me all day throughout that whole period without me having to charge it or having to think in the back of my head that I have to charge it, that is good battery life to me. And so the Mate 9 definitely has that. It has all day battery life. This thing with its 4,000 milliamp hour battery, so if that number is important to you, it's got a big one, 4,000 milliamp hours, and it really translates to great battery life. And so if you want to know the screen on time, I'm getting anywhere between a little bit over 5 to 6.5 hours of screen on time. So as you can see here, this is 5 hours and 16 minutes on that day. 6.5 hours here is the max that I've been able to really hit. You can see the usage that I've got over the course of the day, the different apps that I use and things that are going on in the background. 6 hours here, 5 hours, 20 minutes there, almost 6 hours, 6 hours. So you can see the varied usage. So it depends on my usage. I'm getting just over 5 to up to 6.5 hours of screen on time. I know other people are getting a little bit more, but for me that's really good. And that's, like you saw, typical things like checking email, web browsing, social media, taking some quick photos. That's my kind of usage. So good for me, is like 3 to 4 hours. So anything that gets me 5 to 6.5 hours is really, really good. Other people may get a little bit more, but that's what I'm getting consistently on this. The other thing is charge time. I noticed that charge time, meaning dead, 0 to 100, initially took about 2 hours and 15 minutes. And so after a few charge cycles, it really settled into just under 2 hours. So about an hour, 55 minutes or so. And I know others have seen faster charging times than that. So take this with a little bit of grain of salt, as each device is not exactly the same, and there are other variables that could contribute to varying charging times. But I do know other sites like GSM Arena and whatnot got the same charging times as me, so it's not out of the ordinary. And to really put this in perspective, things like I compared it to the OnePlus 3T and its dash charging, and the OnePlus 3T has a 3,400 milliamp hour battery, and it took about an hour and a half to charge that from 0 to 100. And so for the Mate 9 with its 4,000 milliamp hour battery, taking about 20 minutes longer with its supercharging technology is still pretty comparable. So almost 2 hours is not crazy, especially for a 4,000 milliamp hour battery. And relative to the OnePlus 3T with its dash charging, it's actually very comparable. So if you think the dash charging on the OnePlus 3 is fast, you're not going to be disappointed with Huawei's supercharging technology that they have here in the Mate 9. I think it charges very fast from 0 to 100 for a big battery like this, and really from 0 to 90 or 0 to 80 is pretty quick. It's that last 20% or so that they start to throttle down the charge to preserve some of the negative battery impact. So you're going to get a majority of your battery charged a lot quicker than that 2 hour time limit. So supercharging, really good, charges up really fast, great battery life that lasts all day. No complaints with the battery life or with the charging times here on the Huawei Mate 9. The one thing that you do want to note, or the one thing I do want to note here, is that it does not have wireless charging. So if wireless charging is important to you, you like the convenience of that, you're not going to get wireless charging here on the Mate 9. Now let's talk about the camera. So a big differentiator today in smartphones to me is the camera. This and battery life are typically the tiebreakers when looking into phones, at least for me these days. So really the bottom line here is that the Mate 9 has a great camera. You can see how it performs in my videos again when I pit it against the Mate 9 and Pixel XL, and came away pretty impressed. It really outperforms all the mid-range phones to me. I've tested it up against those, things like the OnePlus 3, OnePlus 3T, Axon 7, all those. I think the Mate 9 has a better camera than all those mid-range devices. It even keeps pace with some of the best phones on the market, like the Pixel. And in some areas like video audio quality, it actually beats it. So great camera here on the Pixel. If you want to see photo samples and video samples, go check out the videos where I pit it against the Mate 8 and the Pixel XL. You can see how it performs in those videos. So we can go here and fire up the camera and walk through the interface really quickly. So if we swipe in from the right, this is how you get to your camera settings, and the max resolution supported with zoom is going to be 12 megapixels. It can go up to 20 megapixels, but you won't be able to use the zoom here. You have other settings like tracking your GPS tagging. You can add some watermarks to it if you want. Other things like capture smiles, so when you take photos, it'll automatically snap a photo when it detects a smile. You've got object tracking on here, which is nice. So a lot of different settings here on the right. If you swipe in from the left, that's when you get to your different camera modes. So your photo, monochrome, this is your black and white photos, and it takes some really great monochrome black and white photos. You have your beauty mode if you want that kind of smoothed out face makeup look on your selfies. Standard video, HDR modes, panorama, night shots, light painting. So if you want to take shots at night of things like streaking taillights, that's what that light painting is for. It's a lot easier than having to go into the manual camera settings and tweak them yourselves. If you just want something nice and quick, just hit light painting, snap the camera at some cars at night, like on a freeway, and you're gonna get some nice streaking taillight photos, or some pretty decent ones, I should say. Not perfect. It does have time lapse, things like slow motion, and a bunch of other settings like good food. That just basically increases the saturation and supposedly makes the food a little bit more punchy and more appetizing, I guess. If you hit more, you can download a few more settings here, like a document scanner and other things that I've already downloaded onto the camera mode itself, but those additional ones are there if you want them. If you want to get to your manual or pro mode, just swipe up from the bottom, and you can control things like your ISO, shutter speed, autofocus, white balance. All that can be controlled here in the pro mode. If you want to get out of pro mode or manual mode, just swipe back down. It takes you back to auto mode. You've got your quick toggles up here for your flash. Here's your wide aperture setting. So this is like your iPhone 7 Plus's portrait mode. So if you snap a picture, it'll give you that nice blurred out bokeh or blurred background. So you have that setting there as well. This is to activate some of your filters. So if you want to touch that and get you through some of your Instagram type of filters. And of course, to flip the camera on for a selfie. And that's about it. So that's just a quick look at the camera interface here on the Mate 9. So next, let's jump into audio. So from a headphone listening experience, it does have a headphone jack on this thing. And if you plug it in and you listen to some headphones with this, it does sound good. There's no custom EQ settings or anything that I see in the settings that to help amplify or modify the sound, but it does sound pretty good. I wouldn't really complain if this was my only device and I was only listening to this. Audio through the headphone jack does sound pretty good, but when I compare it to some of the top of the line smartphones that have things like built-in DACs and amps, like the HTC 10, it really doesn't compare. But if I'm not listening to those phones back to back, I still think this sounds fairly good with the headphone jack and some headphones. Now, the external audio on this, it does have stereo speakers. So it's got one speaker here in the earphone and one speaker here on the bottom. And if you notice really quick in settings, if you go into sound, it does have the stereo plus feature here. So when you rotate it from portrait to landscape, it'll actually activate it into stereo mode. So for example, let's take a quick listen at full volume to some quick music here. So it does get pretty loud to me. When switching to landscape, you can hear that slight pause. So when you're switching between portrait and landscape with music playing, you can hear that slight hiccup. That's switching into that stereo plus mode, that stereo mode here in landscape. Nothing major, just something to point out. And to me, the music does get pretty loud. And just for some relevance here, because audio is tough to judge over video, you can hear it against the HTC 10 because this is another dual speaker setup with the earphone and bottom finder speaker. So really quick here again. So Mate 8 at full volume. HTC 10 at full volume. honestly, I think the Mate 9 is actually louder than the HTC 10 there. So speaker setup on here sounds very good, very loud. I don't think you're gonna have any complaints. That combined with this big screen, if you wanna watch YouTube or movies or videos, that big screen combined with that dual stereo sound really makes for a nice media experience there. And then the last thing here really quickly is addressing some calling and messaging. So because this is a phone after all, calling and messaging is fine. I don't have any complaints in taking phone calls. People on the other end don't have any complaints in hearing the sound of my voice. And of course, it always very depending on your carrier and your signal strength and quality. SMS is not a problem either. And the one thing I want to point out here is that the Mate 9 does not have Wi-Fi calling. So if that's something that you depend on because you don't have good reception at your office or at home and you really need that Wi-Fi calling, the Mate 9 does not support that. So if that's something important to you, you're not going to find it here on the Mate 9. So now just to wrap it up, let's take a look at the quick pros and cons here. So first off with the pros and the positive things, it's a very fast and smooth performing device. No hiccups. That Kirin 960 processor in here is very fast and fluid. Secondly, it's gotten some nice software features actually. So even though EMUI 5 is a little bit too cartoonish and still a bit iOS-like for me, it's got some nice add-on features that are actually useful, like the fingerprint gestures, especially the pull down your notification shade with the fingerprint, the knock features to take screenshots and to activate your split screen, built-in screen recording. All those things are add-ons that are very nice features to have in a smartphone. Other positive things is that it's one of the best, if not the best, LCD display on the market. It's got vivid, punchy colors and a very bright screen. So if you like AMOLED, this being an LCD display, I don't think it will disappoint you too much, except for when you start looking at it with high brightness and at different viewing angles, you'll start to see that the colors start to get a little bit off kilter a little bit. But other than that, as far as an LCD panel goes, this is one of the best, if not the best in the market. Other pros is that it's a long-lasting all-day battery, so you're not going to have any problems with battery life. It's got great battery life with that 4,000 mAh battery, and that really does translate into all-day battery life, at least for me. Other things is that it's great for media consumption, so it's got that large 5.9-inch display. That combined with the dual stereo speakers makes for a very nice media consuming experience. And lastly, it's got a very good camera, a very solid camera that performs well, even in low light, and it's got some great audio while recording video. So if you depend on it for video recording, you won't be disappointed with the audio quality as well as the video quality. Now looking at the cons, first up is that EMUI 5 still has some quirks to it. Lock screen notification behavior still isn't on par with stock Android. I wish they wouldn't touch that and just leave it alone. And it still has some iOS-like features like the folder looks and some cartoonish look to the interface. Secondly, the LCD display can look a little bit washed out at high brightness and at certain viewing angles. Other things that I don't really like here in the cons is that it doesn't have double tap to wake, which, like I said, it is very important, I think, on a device with a rear fingerprint scanner. If you want to lay it down on the table, double tap to wake is definitely almost mandatory. Other negatives is that it does not support Wi-Fi calling. I know a lot of people out there depend on Wi-Fi calling. You're not going to find it here. And it does not have water resistance. So if you really like waterproofing and water resistance and want that peace of mind, Mate 9 does not have that. And lastly, it does not support wireless charging. So a lot of people like the convenience of wireless charging, and you're not going to find it here on the Mate 9. And just to wrap it up with some final thoughts, the Mate 9 was uniquely priced at $599 here in the US when it launched, which is about $200 more than the so-called mid-range phones like the Alcatel Idol 4S, Axon 7, OnePlus 3, OnePlus 3T. And that $600 price tag also placed it about $270 less than the typical top-of-the-line flagship smartphone, something like the iPhone 7 Plus or the Google Pixel XL. So now you need to really ask yourself, does it deliver enough value over the mid-range phones while still competing close enough to those high-end flagship phones at its middle-of-the-road pricing? So it can be confusing for a lot of people, and personally for me, I'd reach for the Mate 9 over any of those mid-range phones, and while I'd still prefer the high-end phones, specifically the Pixel XL, I have no problem recommending the Mate 9 to anyone who wants to save about $270. So where does this leave the Mate 9 exactly where it's priced? Between the mid-range phones and the flagship phones. The Mate 9 is priced appropriately for what it delivers, and that's not a bad thing. The Mate 9 is a great smartphone and definitely delivers a tremendous value at its price point. That being said, I hope I've provided you with enough coverage and information to help make that decision while helping to clarify where I believe this device sits in the crowded smartphone market. So as always, that's what I think, but I'd prefer to hear what you think. So please leave a comment with your questions and let's continue the conversation. If you still have any questions, please also leave that as a comment and I, or maybe one of you, will try to answer them. If you've managed to stick with me this far, then thank you very much for watching and I hope to see you in the next video. Later.